Hello, hello, hello. Hi, guys. Welcome back to Strange Orphan. Happy Friday. How's it going? Welcome back to the Madhouse. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm calling it that. I'm okay. I'm doing fine. But I thought I would talk about identity this week because, well, frankly, I've been letting go of some old versions of self. And I think shedding identities, like shedding old versions of yourself, is hard enough as just a normal human being on planet Earth. When you then tack on the foundational psychological erosion of leaving your original foundation, your original blueprints, that gets even more complicated. That's an even crazier morass. You start pulling a thread of self, and before you know it, the whole sweater has just unraveled. When I cut ties from my family, or they cut ties from me, whatever, it doesn't matter. When that went on, like, I can't even tell you the sort of foundational understanding of myself that just disappeared overnight. It's like, well, if I'm not a part of that foundation, then who am I and what is my new foundation? You sort of feel like a person like sifting through earthquake wreckage, looking for a missing limb. It's not cool. It's not easy. People are like, that's why there's all these, like, there's this batch of people that are like, go no contact. And by the way, like, do what you've got to do. And I totally understand keeping your peace. But at the same time, it's not just like, all right, well, we did it and we're free now. No one's like cutting ties and being like, well, now what's for lunch? Like, your entire set of blueprints to your house has just crumbled and blown away. And you have to entirely rebuild a sense of self and identity and foundation with the, like, taco wrappers and pixie stick dust you now have to work with. It's hard. So I've been thinking a lot about identity, not only because I've been shifting from, one version of myself, one stage of my life into another, but also because to do that in tandem with separating from family, I'm just like, my gosh, are there other people going through this like me? Because who am I? I go to grocery stores and just like wander around, like looking for signs that I'm on the right path. Like, it's not that bad, but it kind of is. For a long time, look, I'll be honest, it's not easy. When you separate from family, you don't have a lot of grounding beneath your feet. And so you're constantly like, is this the right path for me? Is this the way I should be going? Is this what I'm meant to do? And it's really tough to basically, like, coming back into reception with like a true sense of North Star, an internal compass, like an internal projection of self and identity. Like, that is all very foggy stuff. It's very murky terrain when your family foundation has collapsed. So that's what I'm going to get into in this episode. And yeah, like, who the heck am I? If you know, please write into info@strangeorphan.com. Also, by the way, please like and subscribe to the podcast. I'm doing this for you and me. Please tell me who I am. Identity is such a big word. It's such a ginormous word. It's like the umbrella of, like, everything developmental that, like, Erik Erikson and all those dudes, like, there's 8 stages of development and blah, 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 blah. I'm not getting into all that. No one's paying me I'm not doing that. But what I'm trying to say is, like, it's a big, fat landscape. And so there's, like, different ways you could look at it. And I think for me and for a lot of people in this boat, the hardest part of cutting ties is probably, like, the acknowledgement of the false self, like the false persona, the false identity that you've had to sort of wear like a bad Halloween mask for most of your life to get love, to kind of cruise through your upbringing, right? For me, it was performing. It was being shiny. It was being a people pleaser. It was being on. And I went to beauty pageants and I did musicals and I was a playwright and I was an actor and all these things. And at the core of it, at the nucleus of it, there is something pure and good and right there. But what happens is it winds up becoming distorted in a way because it's to earn love. It's not for you to enjoy. And that's when you start to bastardize the gifts and manipulate the world around you. And that's when it becomes a false identity. It becomes a false self because it's a projection of what you think you need to be in order to be loved. It's not, you can't just be yourself in these homes. You have to be like extra, right? And so when you leave these homes, you start to pull all these threads. You start to look at all these places and go like, did I even like that? Like, was that for me or was that for someone else? And it can cause such a crisis in and of itself. When I broke up with my family, there was a period of time where I just had a sort of identity rot. Like, it was almost like a bad facelift, just sort of that didn't take correctly, that just started to like rot off. Like I couldn't even, like the person who I was, all of a sudden, like I couldn't even prop that person up. It was like Weekend at Bernie's with myself. I couldn't even function in the world anymore. It's like a part of me knew that I was dying, and like a dog, I just wanted to go out to the woods and curl up in a ball and be left alone with the last shred of my dignity, you know? But it was a really tough time because I just started blowing stuff. I would like sabotage business calls. Like I would agree to them because I felt like I had to like please my agents, but then I would like not be prepared. Like my brain was shutting down. My heart was like, this version of you is not going to participate anymore. And like, I couldn't keep the jig up. I was like, done. I remember, and it got so ugly because one part of me was like, no, we have to keep going. This is how we survive. And then the other part of me was like, no. Like, I want to blow this. I wanted to like arson my life. It was just awful. I remember this one meeting I had with like a producer and or maybe it was my agents. I don't remember, but it was so bad. I was so bad. And I remember this one dinner I sat there and I was like, I got so drunk. I was just cracking jokes and not taking anything seriously. And I wound up, I'm not a very big person and I was drinking at the time. And I think I had like 2 martinis and I wound up, the restaurant was foolish enough to have wheelie chairs. And so I wound up getting really drunk like a child and wheeling myself out of the restaurant. I wheeled myself out of the restaurant onto the street. I think I made it either into the foyer of the restaurant or literally out onto the sidewalk. And then I think I had to like bring my chair back in. That meal was, that was a death knell. It was over after that. I don't think I was taken seriously ever again. But like I was like, oh God, it was so painful. And I called my therapist the next morning and she was like, were you drunk? Like her voice was like knives. She was like, were you drunk? And I was like, yeah, I was drunk. I was falling apart. I was sabotaging my life. And I tried to blame it on the wheelie chairs. I was like, well, the restaurant had these stupid chairs with wheels on them. Why would you put wheels on chairs in a steakhouse? I just think that's a silly move. People are drinking. She's like, oh, so it was the chair's fault. It was the chair's fault. Is that what you're saying? It was not a good time. It was not a good time. I had a full-on identity rot. I was like Nick Cage in the movie Face Off. And what was so jarring about it, and what was so terrifying about it, was that person, that persona, that version of me was the only version of me that I had ever known my entire life. It was like this shiny go-getter that could just go into a room and make people like you and win them over with my creativity or whatever, charm them to death. Who knows? And so that person was just like dying. I was watching this version of myself and I couldn't let it go. And I really did myself a disservice in more ways than one. I don't think that steakhouse will ever have me back. It gets even more tricky and more confusing of a morass, especially for people in the arts, because here's why. If you grew up in a house with narcissism or any kind of place where you didn't get a great reflection of self, is that these places where we sought identity, whether it's like, the sports arena or the talent arena, or any community really where you sought healthy reflection, those places aren't just a part of your identity. They also become an emotional anchor for your nervous system. So what happens is that you don't know how to leave them behind, because those are the places that actually also were what you used to soothe yourself with. I mentioned last week how our stories can become a source of identity for us and a protection for us almost. And what I found is that when you haven't been given, if you grew up in a narcissistic home or an abusive home, when you haven't been given that proper reflection or attunement to yourself, then what the nervous system needs to feel loved and safe and okay and grounded and stable, you're not only losing an original sense of identity when these false selves kind of fall off, you're also losing the place that was your emotional anchor, that was your healthy reflection. They're like dangerous false anchors of attunement. And I say dangerous because they're not intrinsically dangerous in and of themselves. But when we start abandoning ourselves and they become manipulative or they start to become toxic and we can't extricate ourselves from it because it's an emotional pull, that's when it becomes really dangerous, because it's an external thing. So I certainly went through that as well. I had a lot of thoughts about this past week about Hayden Panettiere, and really devastating and awful what happened to her. And I don't know much about her life other than the fact that she spoke openly about how she was kind of forced into Hollywood by her family. And so, again, I'm not going to speak to what she's been through. I certainly don't know the horrors of it. But I can say that when you find refuge in a place and it's good at first, it can be really hard to pull yourself out of going back to that thing for support. I just wish she had more life rafts for her that were outside of the industry, because it's so hard when your identity and your emotional anchor is tied to that thing that is giving you a sense of identity. It's going to get taken away. That's just the way evolution and identity work. These careers that we've put so much energy into and they've become our life rafts, they can also become the source of our wound. And if you don't have a sense of stability and anchoring outside of your career or what you've invested yourself into, these wounds will just eat you alive if you can't get out of them. I mean, I'll be honest, I think my healthiest reflections came from my agents for a period of time. They were so supportive, but they were making money off of me. So think about when I started to devolve and started to fall apart and started to wheel myself out of restaurants drunkenly. And so if your reflection comes from someone that's getting a paycheck off of you, you're getting into very dangerous territory. And this applies to anybody in sports or any sort of arena where you rely anybody in any working environment where you rely too much on someone else for reflection. And we may not even be aware we're doing it. I certainly was not aware at the time that I relied so much on these people to prop me up emotionally. If you're kind of in the same boat, I think a really great resource is Alice Miller. I've read every one of her books. She's awesome. The best book to dive into this is called The Drama of the Gifted Child. Although I think every one of her books is great. The Drama of the Gifted Child, she talks about when the parents' needs and wants are projected onto the child doesn't have much of a chance to develop a self underneath. One of her quotes is, "It would be wrong to imply that there is a fully developed true self consciously hidden behind the false self. This is not a homecoming, since the home has never before existed. It is the creation of a home." Yeah, so think about that. Like, when you not only cut ties from family, but you cut ties from a false sense of self, it's not like the real you is just waiting at a train station to come in. There is what a lot of sociologists call an identity void. And that's where this sense of erosion comes from. Like, you don't know who you are. And on top of that, it feels like you're kind of dying. But this identity void is like, there is a dearth of person. There is a dearth of you that was never allowed to form or really touch roots. Because again, you weren't reflected properly, so you started to shapeshift before you were even aware of it. And that is just exhausting, really. But check out Alice Miller. She's super great when it comes to like anybody that's gone through narcissistic junk. And so you separate from the false self, and then you find you're in this sort of void space of grieving the loss of the false self that you like was kind of great. I loved my false self. She could make anything work. She was just plucky and smart and lived on iced coffees and could make anything come together. She meant so well. So yeah, so you sort of like remove a lot of identity scum when you separate, and that's a good thing. But then there's the void of yourself afterwards, and that can become, I just found it to be like, it's like you're kind of staring at a conveyor belt of, for a really long time. I was in like a fugue state for like many years. I think all of London, I was in London for 3 years working on a TV show. The whole time I was sort of like lost. I hardly went on any dates. And like the one date I went on, I wound up being with this man who was like telling me about how he's enmeshed with his father, and his father does a lot of cocaine, and his father will like do cocaine and call him sometimes in the middle of the night. And I was like, well, what do you and your dad talk about? And he's like, I don't know, just books he's reading. I was like, I don't know if this is fantastic or awful. But yeah, it's a real devastation. And it's just, I just want to go back to like how hard it is to go through a life transition alone, to have to break up with your family and go through that sort of identity collapse alone, to then realize that the person you have been phoning it in as, this like slightly false version of yourself to survive, to do all of that alone in the psyche, kid, give yourself some credit. That's a large chunk of, that's a giant project. Like it's a devastation. It's the only way I can put it. It's sort of like if your soul is wandering around earthquake wreckage looking for your brain. That's like the feeling. It's so heavy to navigate. It's so much in the grief that comes with it too. I think the biggest thing for me was like coming into realization of all the false projections I had been carrying around. One birthday, I had my therapist had given me a card, And for years, I didn't really get it. It was just like, happy birthday, make a big wish. And then inside she wrote, here's to you uncovering the truth. And I always thought she meant like, oh yeah, the truth is that my family were not that nice and whatever. And years later, like I look back on it and there's so much grief I have about all the false projections that I had to carry that were someone else's projection. And we think that's who we are, but it's not. The truth of who we are is like so buried beneath all that. Like for so long, I just thought like I was a mud pit. I thought I was something awful. And it's not until you like go down into these caves and spelunk down into these sad, dark caves that you find out like these were never my beliefs. These were someone else's eyeballs painted on the walls of my cave. These projections had nothing to do with me. And there's a lot of grief that comes with uncovering that. And then there's a lot of grief of realizing that like there's a huge chunk of your life you didn't fully get to live because you were wearing these coats that weren't yours. I think the hardest part of identity recovery and shedding old identities, well, it's sort of like a visual I have in my mind is like you're passing through a revolving door, and as you're letting go of an identity, you're also meeting them for the first time. It's like these people that we barely got to know that we're just now meeting in like the caves of ourselves and like finding these really innocent creatures that didn't fully get a chance to live. Their time is also up. Like how awful, right? And you have a choice to make. You can either drag them around with you, or you can do the proper thing and like grieve that loss and let them go. Elaine de Botton talks about this a lot, that it's very difficult for the human being to move on from a stage of life if you didn't get the things that you were meant to collect from the previous stage. So you can only imagine. Like, you get to meet these real versions of yourself that didn't get to live because you were, disassociating to survive your house, being a bad kid to survive your house, running away, hanging out with losers, all these things that we had to do to like make armor for ourselves. You then you grieve that, and then you have to double grieve for the innocent version of you that didn't get any time on the field. And that's a really sad thing too. And you want to go back and like avenge them, but that's not advisable. I remember right at kind of the tail end of London. I'm going to cry before I get through this. Don't make fun of me in the comments. I remember at the tail end of London, right as like one of my shows ending and my other show collapsed, and I did I was dealing with grief. I was dealing with I was dealing with like a stage of my life that I was acknowledging I didn't get. It was girlhood. And I was like, I need to get control of myself again. Like, wrap it up. Like I was like, let's wrap this up. I want to expedite this grief and I want it out the door now. And so I thought I could like quantum leap out of grief. I bought tickets to a Joe Dispenza conference. Like, I'm dealing with quantum physics, and like I love quantum physics and I believe in it wholeheartedly. However, that said, if you're in a crippling stage of grief, it may not be the best time to be like, let's just wrap this up and move on. Let's just get to the future. I could not sit in that conference. I think the first meditation I started to like cry unconsolably. By the second one, I was out the door. I blew off the conference and I went around the corner, got a glass of wine, and sat in a church and sobbed for the next 2 days. But what I what was happening was I hadn't fully grieved the stage. And like, you can't enter the new. Like, you cannot quantum leap out of your grief. You just can't. So I wound up sitting in a church in Paris, Our Lady of Victory, in the second arrondissement. Shout out. Shout out. Shout out to that church. It's my favorite church in Paris. And then going to the wine bar across the street and just sitting there with this like version of myself, this identity that I was not yet ready to release. I wasn't ready to become someone new. So I think you have to honor that. I think you need to honor it fully and compassionately and take as much time as you need to kind of fully grieve these parts of us. Because if you just hold on to them, like, I'm just going to be me, but also bring her along too. No, that gets gross. That's when you're like a 40-year-old trying on like slutty tween clothes in Target. Like, that's when you're kind of like uncanny valley for stages of life. When like someone like looks at you and is like, why is she wearing a baby doll dress? Isn't she 45? You don't want to be in that bracket. It's not the best. I know this from experience. But again, like, you've come out of the wreckage of yourself, and then you've met your true self after chiseling away. And then you've got to let it all die. And that's the hardest part of identity, is that in order to really live freely, we have to be willing to like bury these parts of ourselves and let them fully go and do it with grace and grieve them. If you're a strange orphan, you gotta grieve what you didn't get. Bottom line. And then you've gotta fully let it go. And you can't hold on to like we're constantly becoming something new. We are constantly, like, every hero's journey is a death journey. I think for a lot of people, there's this concept of jumping timelines and improving yourself. Like, everyone wants to like get like improvement maxing, right? But no one wants to admit that you have to die to yourself in order to do that. You don't know what the new thing will be, but you have to fully surrender the old false thing before you can find out what the new thing will be. You don't get to see what's coming. You don't get to see what's behind the door. You're just in a hallway with just yourself, and it's like death and rebirth, and you don't know what you're being reborn into. And that's very jarring. I love this C.S. Lewis quote of like, every natural love will rise again and live forever, but none will rise again until it has been buried. Everyone wants to like come out the other side, the victor, but no one wants to go through the burial pyre. And that's a part of shedding old identities, is that you're truly releasing it. You're truly letting it go before you know what the new one is. And in that in-between space, it's so scary for a strange orphan, because in that in-between space, you're just this like amniotic, fragile flagellum where you have no armor. You're like Jeff Goldblum coming out of that egg in The Fly. Like, you're just kind of gooey and new. And it feels so dangerous. But it really is the only way forward. Like, you have to accept that an old version of you is dead and gone. But here's the good news. Here's the really good news. And I almost hesitate to share it, because what happens is a lot of people skip the previous step and they just try to jump right to this. And you can't skip the death step. Sorry, that identity's got to die. But if you do it fully, if you really embrace the letting go of that old version of yourself, the good news is, the plot twist is, that pure version of yourself, it comes back to you, but it comes back to you in the purest, most authentic form, in a totally new form, in a totally new way, but way more you, if that makes sense. Like, my creativity, my creative essence, everything I liked about myself, the false version had to go. And along with a lot of other things, half of my wits, But when you come out of it, you meet yourself in a new way. And the new way that creativity and that authenticity is coming forward, it's like really surprising and way more powerful than you thought. A really good example of this is Robert Downey Jr. I think a lot of people know his story of like, he was an actor, went through the ringer in Hollywood, and he, went to jail. He like learned a really hard lesson, and his struggles with addiction and all that stuff, just really heartbreaking, right? Well, he couldn't become Tony Stark if he hadn't gone through all that. And he certainly couldn't have become Tony Stark if he hadn't let that version of himself go. You don't get to become Tony Stark unless you've gone through the caves of yourself, right? And so I just like this idea of like, if you love something, let it go. That can even be the most beloved parts of yourself, like the most beloved parts of your identity. You could feel like you're losing them forever. They will come back to you in really cool and surprising ways. If you just go through the process like a good little soldier, you have to fully do it. When we keep looking back to these old identities, these old versions of ourselves, what we're essentially doing is we're just kind of living in the past. Like if you're really hanging on to the way something was, you're actually just ignoring the present moment, and you're ignoring like how the present moment is where you meet your truth, not in the past. And trying to get back to something that already was is like trying to replicate something that doesn't exist anymore. You can't do it. It's impossible. It's like you can't ask like a jazz musician to play something twice. The same goes for the energy that is ourselves. And so if you're constantly trying to get back to an old identity, an old version of self, it's sort of like an affront to the divine, because I guarantee you, on the other side of that, there's magic that's waiting for you in the present moment. It's just different. It's just not what you expected, and it's different from what you planned. But you're not going to find it until you really embrace what's in front of you and stop looking back to what has already taken place. And think about how nice it is to like get to meet the better version of you. Like all I want to do is meet more me. Like I want to meet the me that has been hidden beneath a lot of false stuff. That's always like, that's a treat to get to meet yourself. And I think we shouldn't slam it and be like, no, I'm good. I'm going to stick with who I am. Keep meeting yourself, because that's how you keep meeting God. That's what that is. Okay. So I do have some meager advice for anybody out there who's going through the leveling that is identity erosion, post-separation, or just any identity erosion at all. It's pretty brutal. These are some notes I took on my own journey that I thought I would share with you guys that might be helpful. And if not, throw them away. Use them as a life raft. I don't care. My first advice would be to stop forcing what you know it needs to be let go from your life. And you may not be wanting to know, but you know deep down when something no longer needs to come with you, when something needs to be released. You know when the energy is not there for something anymore. And I'm not talking about when things are just hard work that you just need to get through and you just need to like Tolstoy your way through a project or a season of your life. I'm not talking about like training ground eras. I'm talking about when you know that the energy for something has left the building and it's time to let it go and you can't bring it with you any further. And that can be really devastating. But if you don't start letting them go, they will be ripped away, and it'll get even more painful, and it'll be even harder to get yourself back to a state of neutrality or just a state of groundedness. So try to just like let things go with grace as much as you can. And in doing so, what you're doing is you're making room for the new stuff to come in. You always have to be making room in your life for these new seasons to bring in something more powerful than you were imagining, but only if there's room, be in the unknown of yourself as much as possible during these times. Like, oh my gosh, there was this girl that said the funniest thing on the internet the other day. She was like, you know that hallway between your old self and your new self? I am being beat up the hell up in this hallway. I was like, oh my God, bless you. I know what you mean. But you got to be present with yourself in these in-between states, because that's the only way you're going to meet the new version of yourself. If you keep going back to the old things and the old people and the old places, you're never going to get to the new version of yourself. You're only going to find them by being present in the now, with the discomfort of that glorious, spacious in-between of self, which just feels like you're floating out in the universe. It feels awful. But just stick it out. Just try it. Which also leads me to the next one, which is like, the best way to keep meeting yourself is to do something new. Like, challenge yourself in a new way. Meet new people. Just expand your circles, really. I think the more we like challenge ourselves in a new arena, or with just a new project or a new hobby or a new area of study, those places become ways in which we subtly meet ourselves, because we're doing a new thing, and so we don't automatically know how we're going to respond to it. So in doing so, you're meeting yourself. Like, traveling is a great way to kind of figure out who you are, because you're meeting yourself in a new environment, and it just expands your world, right? So like, new things can come in to you. And then lastly, this is a big one. This is like the most important one, I think, but be choosy about who you surround yourself with during in-between times. I'm not saying like get rid of your friends from the past, but be wary of people who make their trauma their identity, and who make their trauma their entire story. Be wary of people who all they want to talk about is like how hard it is for them every minute of the day, because you start to like osmosically blend in with that energy and that world. I think I'm the biggest proponent of grief. When you're feeling grief, you should definitely stop and grieve. But you don't want grief to be your story. And you don't want like wounding to be your story. I'm a really big fan of the way Ocean Vuong, he doesn't like to use the word trauma. He likes to use the word violence. He's like, what violence happened to you? And I love this, because it's like, violence, there's immediately a perpetrator. It's not just vague. But also, violence has an ending. It happened in the past and it's over. Trauma, it's an amorphous, smelly old coat that it feels like you don't know when you get to take it off. Like, trauma can go on forever if we allow it. Trauma can become your story if you aren't conscious of it, cognizant of it. So I really like that, because it kind of is like, one is the past and one is still with you, and reframing gives you power over your story, which I really think is pretty important. But yeah, other than that, like, good luck. No, you're going to be fine. The Buddhists always say that identity is suffering. And the more we can release ourselves of these old stories that no longer need to weigh us down, the freer we become, the lighter we become, and the more we meet ourselves. And that, I think, is the most powerful place and mindset you can be coming from, really. But yeah, thanks for going on this journey with me this week. If you have Strange Orphan, Dear Orphan questions, please send them in to info@strangeorphan.com. Like and subscribe. And yeah, have a really good weekend, you guys. Take care. Okay, bye.